This is an interview for the White Lake Environmental History Project. We are here today in Montague, Michigan with Mary Mahoney and Ken Mahoney. Have both of you read and signed the legal release?
Yes, we have.
Thank you. And I would like to start by just getting to know a little bit about you. If you might want to just tell us where you're from, or if you've been here your whole life, or a little bit about your background.
You want me to go first? Okay. I've been pretty much here my whole life. I grew up in Montague, graduated from Montague High School, left for about 5 years to live in Chicago, to go to the University of Chicago, and then came back here as a teacher and taught at Holton for 30 years, retired from there, and currently I'm doing political stuff. I'm the chair of the Muskegon County Commission.
Yeah, well, I didn't move here till I was about 18. It was like in 1967. And I had lived in Muskegon my whole life, right near in the lakeside area. So I mean, I've always lived by the lake, and I love our lakes. And then moving here, of course, I appreciated our beautiful White Lake. And we lived right here about 2 miles, I'd say, from Hooker and DuPont Chemical for really the rest of our lives. We're still here. And I really only graduated from high school, Catholic Central. And anyway, I really enjoy living in the area.
Okay, thank you. Can you...
Let me just mention that we also have 2 daughters that grew up in Montague at the time of the height of the pollution stuff. They were born in 74 and 77.
Okay, thank you. Do you, can you tell us your earliest memories of White Lake?
My earliest memories of White Lake, my father... Every Saturday we went downtown to Rossler's gas station. And we worked on cars down there. But he also had an old wooden boat across the street tied up that we went fishing on the lake all the time with, along with ice fishing. And it's always kind of been centered around White Lake. And
do you remember what the lake looked like?
Well, yeah, in the late 50s it was pretty weedy and shallow. Kind of reminds me of a current. It got pretty low, and then it kind of ebbs and flows. But and again, I think the major pollution concern at that time was the tannery.
Oh, okay. Mary, what about you? Your earliest memories of White Lake?
Well, I visited here right on Old Channel Trail with my aunt for a lot of summers. That I spent the summer down at Maple Beach Park swimming, and so I've been exposed to the area before I was 18, and then of course my daughters too swam here, and we all did when there was pollution here, but we didn't know it. I guess that's really all I've got to say.
How long have you lived in your present location on the lake?
Since 1990 we've been here. Before that we just lived up the hill.
Okay. What, now I think, what were your earliest thoughts or recollections of when you heard the chemical companies were coming to town? Or what did you first hear about the chemical companies?
Well, I did because, it was 50 years of lumbering, 50 years of slumbering, and now the new awakening, the ads, jobs coming to town. We're actually going to become this great industrial center now, chemical center. Probably when I was in elementary school even was the promotion that Hooker put on, because there was some opposition to Hooker coming here.
Now, how did that come about, or who did it come from?
What the
opposition?
The opposition came from the fellow that lived out in Blueberry Ridge. It wasn't Blueberry Ridge at that time.
McFall?
McFall. and he had gone to New York and investigated. This is after the fact. I don't remember that part of it, but I just know that's what happened. And they purchased a large amount of land, both Hooker and DuPont, for not just manufacturing, but for disposal, I'm assuming.
And was anybody concerned that it might affect the image of the community as a resort community or tourism?
I don't think so. They were, for a town that had been sleeping for a long time, nothing was happening. There wasn't any development as such. The old-time resorts were still here, but there wasn't any new process. And, they got a lot of the governmental officials and folks got excited about new jobs coming, economic development. The town will boom.
Well, and we've been, we know that the schools expanded and a lot of new people came to town.
Mm-hmm.
What did you think about changes to the community because of this?
I don't know, in terms of the actual community itself, I don't think it changed a whole lot. It was still pretty much Montague, small town, and Whitehall, same thing, kind of small town. Hooker did what they usually do, and most major companies do. They signed up with the chamber, and we're just like you, small town folk. We're trying to survive. And
when did you first, have any idea that there were concerns about pollution?
Go ahead.
Well, really, the summer we got married, I think was 1973, and we had bought an old house, and we had fresh white paint on all the windowsills and everything. And we had gone away for a couple of weeks on our honeymoon, and my sister had set up in our dining room champagne glasses and a candle. Well, when we came home, all our windowsills had all this black or some stuff on it. And there had been a release that we didn't know about because we were gone.
What do you mean by a release?
We never found out what it was. I think it was from Hooker. But there was this stuff all over on our new windowsills. We had the windows open, and I guess, I don't know, but I thought, well, here's my new house, and what did I come home to? It was my new old house. And that's what I think really alerted me that what's going on here.
Was there anything else, any concerns among the community?
I'm not so sure. Like, for example, when I was growing up and picking asparagus up Lamus Road, you always heard the foghorn from DuPont warning of a release, all the time. And occasionally, there were some releases of chlorine at one time when I was in school. They sent us home from school because they were worried about it. That hit the national news because my uncle was in Washington State, called and said, "Are you folks okay?" Because of, the big chlorine release.
And that was likely from Hooker?
Yeah, that was about probably 58, 59, something like that. So that was part of it. You could also, if you were working in the asparagus patches up north on Lamus, see a haze coming over from a release either from DuPont or Hooker. And the Hooker's had some problems with the pipeline leaking of the hydrochloric acid killing trees. And, so there was some concern or thoughts about it, but I don't believe the real organic stuff was in anybody's mind at the time.
Mainly the accidents. When did you first recall, maybe people speaking about pollution on the land or in White Lake?
Well, I'd say it was what we smelled, the chlorine, because different days, you could smell, you knew something was in the air that wasn't supposed to be there. We couldn't see it, but really that was the first, is that what we smelled we knew was not right. And then of course later they found all the chemicals, on site in barrels and that, but I'd say that was the first complaints. And then chlorine, they had several big leaks of that. And people would call me, like from Blueberry Ridge, and the police had actually come around and said to get out of there, out of your homes. But the next day in the paper, I think it was Bernard Rondike was the head of the environmental health, and he said, oh, there was no more chlorine there than in my pool. Well, that was several hours later. But if you were there during that blast, it was strong. So that's kind of how, the first that we were alerted something's going on.
Did you remember feeling any sickness or ill health from those events? No, other than we knew that it wasn't good for you. I mean, it didn't really make you sick. But if you had asthma or you were a baby, then that would be different probably. Yeah. Do you remember any of some of the first people who started speaking out about the pollution concerns?
Obviously went Dahlstrom, but he was focused initially on the tannery. Later on came into the hooker issue. You got to know what the smell of C56 is because it was, pretty much around the plant.
And which hooker chemical? One of the compounds they made.
Yeah, it's a lengthy name.
Now, wasn't it Warren Dobson?
Warren's the one that...
The first one that worked at Hooker and came out and said, they're doing bad things here, even though it cost him his job. Because no one wanted to say that, obviously, and he is the first man that really came out to say, I know this is happening.
Surprisingly, the DNR or DEQ or whatever it was called at that point had given them a pass on every inspection. And it was Mr. Dobson who had indicated to them, hey, there's a whole stack of barrels out back here that you might want to look at. And I think at that point, the DEQ started to take an interest in groundwater pollution from that pile.
Did you have any interaction with any other workers, and did they ever talk about, their feelings about the pollution issues in the news?
A lot of the, I knew folks that worked there. They did not comment on it much simply because they didn't want their jobs to go away. In terms of the community, it's a lot, it's always an issue. Do you speak out? And then the threat is they'll close and leave, and then these folks won't have a job. And, that was a pretty hot item for a long time.
Now, I'd be like in the grocery store, and people would come up to me that worked at Hooker and say, "Well, I'm really glad you're bringing this out." They can't, they couldn't themselves because they'd lose their job. And then there was some that didn't just keep it quiet. So I had it both ways. There was a lot of people concerned that did work there also.
No. We've also heard that some people really just didn't have an inkling of what was happening. Some of the workers, they didn't realize what was happening.
That could be. Some of them are old timers that worked out there that didn't see an health issue at all. This is just work. You go weld in a terrible place. Don't worry about it. It's fine.
What were, what kind of feelings did you have when you started realizing that there were concerns about pollution, for the area in White Lake?
Well, I always thought the government's going to protect us. They're not going to let this happen if there's harmful chemicals. And then I found out, no, they don't know what's going on. We know what's going on. And I did find out one of the things about when the inspectors came to these chemical companies, they had to, I guess, or they did, they would call the companies when they're coming, the inspector. That's the worst thing that they could have done because they shut everything off. Now, if you own a bar and the inspector's going to come tomorrow, you wouldn't serve anybody under 21. You'd have everything. That's an automatic thing. That's the worst thing that they did do, and I don't think they should do that because any kind of problem will not be picked up then if you know an inspector's coming.
Did you, the two of you, take any action once you realized there was a problem with pollution? What are some of the things that you did?
She did a lot of phone calling, and getting a hold of the various agencies and finding out that you get passed off from one agency to another. No, that's not groundwater, that's surface water, all those kinds of issues.
Did you work with any local officials relating to your concerns? And wasn't it a county committee that you may have been?
There was a health study finally set up by the state with local people, but it really was just to pacify us. Really, nothing had been done. But there was 3 or 4 people in the area that had degrees, and they said, do you want to be in the group? Because I had been real active in it, and I said, no, I don't have the, the background that you do. The thing of it is, I had the time, and where they didn't, and I did find out, don't worry about that. Even if you don't have a biology background or whatever, chemical, you can still get action taken. And so I called all the agencies and all the politicians, and we did it was an election year, the one year, so we played them. Who's going to help us? Are the Republicans or are the Democrats? And that worked pretty good.
And was this a local citizens group then?
Yeah, it was Ben Bennett, Lois Brinks, was it Roger Simon?
Roger Simon.
Well, anyway, they're all local.
And what was your focus? What were you trying to accomplish?
Well, at the time, the state of Michigan was starting to send out reports and so on, and this it was a citizens kind of review committee for information, send it to us, and they would do that. The problem sometimes is they got hung up in the technicalities of it, this chemical, that chemical, the parts per million and that, rather than the real issue, which you're polluting the groundwater.
What happened with that group over time?
Kind of faded away, I think.
What was that? Yeah, it kind of. Well, they were so much information that they really didn't have time to review it anyway.
Technical overload.
But I was the one that people were calling, when they saw somebody dumping something or they were smelling something in the air. And at one point I did contact Toxic Substance Control Commission, and they really helped us. And right after that, the state disbanded them. And they were the only one that helped us. It was Dr. Larry Holcomb was in the group. And when the cleanup was done, there was these different stipulations in the contract, but there was like a loophole. And so they weren't supposed to work like if the temperature was over 70, say. But then we found out that was in specific areas. They found C56 and all this in other areas. And we had blasts of chemicals that we shouldn't have had to breathe. And I'd call Toxic Substance Control Commission. He'd come and they said, shut them down. So and that happened. But the state didn't shut them down.
This was during the cleanup.
During the cleanup, yeah. And they did help us somewhat, with the other things. And during the cleanup, too, I did contact the federal group. EPA. And they said, well, let us know. We'll let you use our lab and different things if you need to. So we did use them.
What were your concerns about the pollution? What were you worried about?
Well, obviously, you have 2 young children in the house, you know, what long-term effects on them, you know, growing up with continual air pollution and water pollution both. You know, the use of the lake, those kinds of things.
What was the community viewpoint as the issue started to hit the news? Or the general feeling about what was going on?
We always have two issues there. The local folks who depend on resort and that kind of thing didn't want to say a whole lot about it, just kind of do clean up, keep it low level, low key. And then you have the activists who wanted to get it done, move it forward, bring it out, say here's the issue, let's get it done and fix it and move on.
Do you think there were some people who didn't believe it was a problem?
Oh, definitely. You know,
Yes.
you know, you have how many believed the director there, Dwayne Colpoy, saying it's not a chocolate factory. You know, what do you expect? It's industry. You're going to have some issues.
And I think they trusted the agencies, the governmental agencies, that they're not going to let something go on that shouldn't, which we found out was not true.
What was your viewpoint of local government or local community leaders at the time?
You know, they were kind of put in the hot spot in the sense of, you know, if we go out and support, you know, pushing Hooker and those folks out of town because they've polluted and we want it cleaned up, then we're going to alienate the local business people who want them to stay or at least don't want to hear about the pollution issues because it affects our business.
Yeah, like the hardware store and the auto, the Dodge dealer, they all, you know, made a lot of money from these companies because they made sure they used local. And if they left, then they would be also losing.
Was it talked about openly in the community?
We were shunned. I remember going to Old Channel Inn and that one real estate guy, and they were, whispering back, and it really was hard. And if I go downtown to Ben Franklin or something, I know the businesses did not want this to be brought up.
Did you trust the companies?
No. Flat out no.
Two companies? Did
you trust the companies?
Oh, trust them? No. We talked to them.
Yeah. Well, did you start out by trusting them and then that changed over time?
Well, when I smelt chemicals, I didn't bother to call the toll-free number that the state has because you never could get through to anybody. But I'd call Hooker, and the guy would come out. Well, of course, it would be an hour later, and chemicals dissipate. Oh, well, I don't smell anything, So, but they knew that there was a lot of complaints, and I and other people made them personally to them.
Did you, what other activities did you do? I heard that you were going to lay down in front of a truck.
Well, that was a whole other issue. In the settlement that the state made with Occidental, we were guaranteed that they would never bring any waste from any other companies.
As part of the cleanup.
As part of the cleanup, to put in the vault. Well, then when we heard Berlin and Faro across the state was a big dump site, and the DNR okayed them to, it was like caravans for months of all these trucks bringing this waste and putting it into the vault. And we really felt like, that they had promised us something and they're reneging on it. And we were very strong. The people, everybody was strong about that issue. And so when the first trucks came, we decided we'd do a peaceful march. And I called the state police, so they knew what we were doing. It would be peaceful, and you got to get a permit and everything. So the sheriff patrol and state police was there, and we wanted one person to get arrested, and I was prepared to do it. Well, then Ralph Rose, a retired judge, said, well, Mary, do you mind if I get arrested? I said, oh, yeah, that's fine with me. So he stood in front of the truck, and the state policeman did not want to arrest him. And he said, no, you arrest me because I'm not moving. And so he wanted to put him in the front seat. He said, no, I'm going in the back seat. And he really stuck his neck out. And they did take him to jail then. But I was prepared to do it. And I warned my daughters, now you might hear that I'm in jail tonight, so that they get prepared, you know. But luckily I didn't have to do that. But that was one of the strongest issues. Everybody was against bringing that.
So everybody in the community.
And the DNR wanted to do it because it got them out of a pinch, because they okayed this dump site. And they shouldn't have. And they had okayed it. So by bringing this stuff here, they were off the hook there.
What do you think was the perception of White Lake in the community during that time? I mean, locally and bigger.
Well, unfortunately, I think locally there were some that, again, just this isn't an issue, it's not a problem, but you know, more and more folks started, you know, the fish glow in the lake, that kind of thing. And as that perception went nationwide, when there were articles in nationwide magazines, Life and Time and that kind of thing, and Detroit papers picked up on it as, you know, this is, especially because at the same time Hooker was in trouble in New York for selling their dump site to a school, and then the kids were getting sick in the houses, and that Love Canal, and it gave them, you know, a terrible image, and you know, the connection to White Lake was pretty obvious.
Were you aware of any citizen groups that were, you know, working on the issues at the time? You know, related to Hooker or the pollution in the lake?
Well, we had several folks that would come over to the house on a regular basis in meetings about what do we do, where are we going, how are we going to confront this. As far as organized citizens groups, I don't think so. I think it was just...
Now, Wint could have had his own group, too. And Wint really would have liked to have the company sued. Now, we had gone to Lansing when they were working on the settlement, and this is what they told us. If this goes to court, it's going to be years. Years and years. If we do the settlement, the cleanup's going to start right away. So we thought, well, let's get on with it, and let's get it cleaned up. And even the Attorney General, Frank Kelly, met with me and Marion Dawson one day, and he said, we want you people to be satisfied here. We don't want to do anything you don't want. And so we thought it was good, but there was things in there. The one, they did bring stuff from a different dump site, and the air pollution went over what it was supposed to. And we were told, well, there was $1 million check that Frank Kelly had on the news. This is the money for cleanup, so, or to monitor. So when we had these chemical blasts, I called there and I said, well, where's your guys to monitor? And this is another problem that they do with pollution. That fine was put in a general fund. And he said, we have to beg for every dollar we want. It was not reserved for the Hooker dump site, which we didn't know. So they hired this small little company to monitor, Johnson and Anderson. And they said, well, we can't be there all the time. We're only getting, you know, this little bit to do it. So what we thought was going to be this grand monitoring wasn't. That was one of the problems. But I'm glad we got it taken care of. Well, but this is temporary. Let's hope at some point in our future they can figure out something else to do with it.
Were you and other citizens satisfied with the cleanup of Hooker?
I guess given the nature of the beast, so to speak, it's probably the best they could have done. I'm not convinced the vault system is going to save us forever. But
Well, one of the things was there was not a lot of cleanups. There was no cleanups of this type ever. So there wasn't a lot to go on. But what we were told, there was a big cleanup in Texas, and they had to put 3 foot of clay. And I think our vault was 9 foot. And that this way exceeds what the standards were of clay. And the monitoring will be, so we thought, well, it's the best technology right now. And I guess we kind of figured that's the best you can do for right now.
What about no man's land? What about the charges that there were contaminated areas left that didn't get into the vault?
that was part of the problem with the agreement.
Yeah.
They laid out
the way it was worded.
the way it was worded. They laid out various areas that needed to be cleaned, and if it wasn't in that particular document, then Hooker just let it go.
They should have had a clause in there saying if more pollution is found, it is to be taken care of. And so if it was not in the specific area that was recognized on the settlement, then they would just leave it.
Well, and that's where the term no man's land came about.
Mm-hmm.
It seems there were, people knew that some of the areas were not being cleaned up.
Right.
And did those areas eventually get cleaned up?
Eventually, they excavated next to the old the production facility where the main no man's land was. There are a couple other spots that now are being treated, but part of the problem is that it goes down to the groundwater. It's hard to dig it out.
What did you think when the federal EPA came in the 90s and did the second cleanup to get some of the no man's land areas and then to demolish the building?
Yeah, well, that was a welcome.
Yeah, very welcome.
Because you could still, on hot days, smell C56 coming off the no man's land. Just riding by it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have anything else to say about that time? What was effective? What helped to get the attention of government leaders?
Well, we also dealt somewhat with DuPont, because DuPont's always been a better public relations firm than Hooker ever was. I mean, Hooker just was, we don't care, we're going to do what we're doing. I just remember the Pearson Creek event where they killed a whole bunch of fish in Pearson Creek, and I think the state fined them $500. Well, and they had a valve over Pearson Creek to open up when it got rough on Lake Michigan, so their pipeline wasn't working, and they would open that occasionally and let it flow down the Pearson Drain or Creek. And at one point, this DEQ or DNR, or whatever it's called at that point, said you can't have the valve over the creek.
Listen to this now.
So they moved it and ran a fire hose back into the creek.
So it was doing the same thing.
It wasn't out over the creek, it was up the pipe a little ways. And we had gone to, we had a meeting with the manager at the time, and we had photos. A friend of ours had trespassed and taken photos of this valve. And we talked to them, and he started to pull out the corporate policy about we would never pollute. And we said, we don't care what corporate policy is, we know what you're doing. And that went a long ways to eliminate trust. Come on, be honest.
Do you think there are any lessons to learn from the area's pollution era?
I would think going back to hers, you know, it has to be a local vigilance on things. You can't assume that the state and federal government or even local government is going to protect the environment. You have to be vigilant. There are agencies, they will help you, but they don't have the wherewithal normally nor the concern unless you squawk.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is, don't worry, you know, if you think, oh, well, you're not educated enough to do this. If you know right and wrong, and do whatever you can do to make phone calls or whatever. And the other thing I wish could happen about with this settlement is the things that were not done right in our settlement. I'd like to think if there was another settlement of this type, that these things wouldn't happen, but I know they will, because nobody, I've called attention to several of the things, and nobody acts like they care. And probably the same thing will happen with the air pollution. You mark certain areas that's got to be cleaned up. If you find it right 2 foot over, you know, that won't happen. And with the air quality, it was written that if the temperature was over a certain degree, they could not work in this area. But they'd work in a different area that wasn't on there, and then we had chemicals in the air.
The other issue was the average.
Oh, yeah.
They took a 24-hour average of
Yeah.
air releases instead of saying, well, you got a whole bunch here, but over the 24-hour period you were fine.
But if you breathed it for 5 minutes, it was strong.
What about cleanup of White Lake? And what do you know about cleanup of White Lake and things that have been done to get the lake healthier?
I think it's been a long, hard slog, so to speak. You know, like I'm going to the civil rights meeting today. A lot of what's happened there is the same kinds of things happen in White Lake. You have an initial flurry of activity saying that this is bad, we got to do something, but it's a long-term process of getting it back to somewhat normal. You know, you're finally seeing some of the results. You know, the Tannery Bay has been cleaned out, the no man's land out by, or the dead zone or whatever off of Hooker. Some concerns about trying to keep just little things, phosphorus out of it, no phosphorus on your lawn. All of those things contribute to the health of the lake, but they do take a while, and it takes a lot of work on a part of a lot of individuals to do that.
Do you, what do you see as White Lake's needs for the future? You know, once the lake has been taken off the list of areas of concern, is called clean.
Again, the vigilance, making sure that we don't become lackadaisical about it. Oh, it's pretty good now. Compared to what it used to be, it's great, you know, but it can slide quickly into a mess again.
How do you think the whole experience changed the community, if it did?
Personally, I think there's more thoughts about the importance of this water to the whole community health. Not physical health so much, but just the whole community thrives because of the lake. And if you mess with that, you really destroy the community. And I think there's a feeling that environmentally is much stronger than it was, say, in the early 70s and 80s.
Are there different attitudes towards chemical companies, government, agencies? I mean, have those attitudes changed?
I think with industry, you know, everyone likes it because it provides jobs and that, but I think there's also a concern that you don't want to destroy the community just to have it. Muskegon County at one time had the worst groundwater pollution in the state, primarily because you're on a sand dune, and anything you dump on the ground ends up in the groundwater. as opposed to places that have a good clay layer that holds things.
Do you have anything else either one of you want to add?
No, other than we need to keep on doing and trying to keep cleaning up whatever we could do with our lake because it's so precious to us.
Same thing.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.